I want to continue our work on stylistic devices. Once again, just introducing one, analyzing it, and then having you think about maybe how you can incorporate it. So we ended on polysyndeton and the Dean scream. Let's go ahead and pick back up with anaphora. So anaphora, a lot of stylistic devices are premised upon repetition, deliberate repetition. And anaphora is a repetition of the first word or set of words at the beginning of a sentence or clause or phrase. So, Winston Churchill was a tremendous resource of stylistic writing. And I won't read the whole thing, but you can go back to a lot of his famous speeches. The "We shall fight" speech is a perfect example of anaphora. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and in the oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. I won't continue on there. I'm very much falling into the pattern that he used. But this stylistic device has argumentative impact. And this is at an important point in World War II. If you were listening to this speech, reading this speech, you wouldn't listen to this and go, I think they're about ready to give up. I think they're going to throw in the towel real soon. So anaphora is hitting the key phrase, we shall fight. That's the theme of the speech. That's what's being repeated often. And so that's really a good takeaway in terms of how style impacts impression and the speech's argument. We can hear anaphora in, this is Hillary Clinton's DNC address from 1996.
To raise a happy, healthy, and hopeful child, it takes a family. It takes teachers. It takes clergy. It takes business people. It takes community leaders. It takes those who protect our health and safety. It takes all of us.
So in that clip, and I think there's some problems with delivery in that, but in that clip, you can hear how audiences respond to style, right? By the time it's clear that this is a stylistic device being used, you can hear the applause starting to rise, okay? So we've got this repetition that calls for an audience response. They can hear it being performed. There's something different about that section of the speech. So if anaphora is repetition at the beginning of a phrase or set of clauses, epistrophe is repetition of a word or phrase at the end of a number of clauses or phrases. Here in the U.S., the Gettysburg Address has a famous example of this, right?
And that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
You can hear epistrophe performing that important service. It's reinforcing the important aspect. It's prioritizing a key idea. So you can also hear that, here's a Malcolm X speech.
I saw you were afraid to bleed. Long as the white man sent you to Korea, you bled. He sent you to Germany, you bled. He sent you to the South Pacific to fight the Japanese, you bled. You bleed for white people. But when it comes time for seeing your own churches being bombed and little black girls murdered, you haven't got no blood.
So I mean, that's pretty damning indictment. We've got style here, we've got epistrophe and also some antithesis, but we've got style being the way in which an argument is being made. Right? Through style, we're levying evidence. Okay? He's saying, here are evidences of times that you've been willing to sacrifice. Now it's more in your self-interest, and you're not willing to. That's a pretty strong argument that's being made through this stylistic device. So style really allows you to highlight key ideas, prioritize ideas. So if you're deciding where you're putting style, you're really, if you have to make a choice, you're really developing style around your core ideas, your key themes. So if we've talked about anaphora, epistrophe, let's talk about symploche, repetition of the first and last words in a clause over a series of a number of clauses. So this is from Ted Kennedy's eulogy for his brother Bobby Kennedy, Robert Kennedy.
My brother need not be idealized or enlarged in death beyond what he was in life. To be remembered simply as a good and decent man who saw wrong and tried to right it, saw suffering and tried to heal it, saw war and tried to stop it.
Okay, so that's one example of simploque. Let's take a listen to another Malcolm X quotation, because again, simploque is a really good one to use because you're saving a lot of time, right? Your variable is surrounded by a lot of stuff that you just get to repeat. And we'll come back and look at these two examples in terms of how they're escalating the variable here, how they sort of escalate each time around. But let's listen to this Malcolm X one.
Much of what I say might sound bitter, but it's the truth.
Right.
Much of what I say might sound like it's stirring up trouble, but it's the truth.
Right.
Much of what I say might sound like it is hate, but it's the truth.
And certainly you probably notice up to this point sort of a prevalence of 3 in a lot of stylistic devices. It's certainly no solid rule, but 3 allows for a pattern to emerge. And we can hear the pattern. It allows for, step 1, step 2, step 3 with the change, step 1, step 2, the change up. And sometimes it's simply going to be a contrast. So you're working in, just having the stylistic run twice instead of 3 times. But running a rule of 3 is pretty popular. And so if you go back and you listen to that Ted Kennedy clip or that most recent Malcolm X one, you'll hear sort of a building, right? So the repetition grows, but it grows in terms of value or priority or intensity. So in the Ted Kennedy, we saw who saw wrong and tried to right it, who saw suffering and tried to heal it, who saw war and tried to stop it. So we go from wrong to suffering to war, right? That's a deliberate choice. You couldn't swap that around too many ways and have it have the exact same impact. You don't start with war, then go to suffering and maybe end on right or saw wrong. So too with the Malcolm X one, because in this one, we've got an example of him moving from bitter to stirring up trouble to hate. So you're sort of building that in terms of the repetition. You're increasing the stakes or decreasing the stakes, however you wish. But there's a logic to not only the stylistic device, but argumentatively what it's doing. You can also do this just with X, your repetition, same repetition plus some small change. Let's go ahead and take a look at anadiplosis. So in anadiplosis, we're engaging in repetition of the last word of one sentence at the beginning of the next sentence. So this is a good example here from George W. Bush's address to the Congress following the September 11th attacks.
Tonight we are a country awakened to danger and called to defend freedom. Our grief has turned to anger, and anger to resolution.
So certainly in that speech, this stylistic device has an important role to play. You have to acknowledge the anger, but the speech can't end on anger. The speech can't dwell on anger for too long. So this particular stylistic device allows you to say, our grief has turned to anger, but then we don't stop there, and our anger to resolution. So you're making an argument and you're passing through this problem area, but you're not resting on that. So anadiplosis has some repetition, but allows you to sort of move through an idea and sort of make some sort of causal argument. This is also very valuable in a number of other stylistic devices. Let's go ahead and pause again here. We'll finish out stylistic devices in the next lecture. At this point, since we've talked about a number of stylistic devices, you might just try jotting down a few, thinking on a speech that you're working on and drafting out, taking one of these equations for eloquence and writing a stylistically rich, stylistically interesting line for your speech.